Something that happens every time I play the dulcimer in public is someone will come up to me and say, "What is that?" Or if you're in Japan, "Kore wa nan desu ka?" Or in any other country I've been into, they always wondering, what the heck is this guy playing? And I would say, it's a dulcimer. And then they would say, "What's that?" And that's kind of one of the charms for me is that nobody knows very much about them. Well, there are people that know a lot about dulcimers, but the general public doesn't quite know about the dulcimer. And the reason for that is, I think, because it was invented in the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains on the east coast of the United States. And until recently, relatively recently, to get into those mountains, you had to pretty much walk. There weren't a lot of roads back in the day when the dulcimer was first invented. And the dulcimer first was invented in the early 1800s. And they believe that it came from Europe. The idea of it came from Europe, from Germany or from Norway. There were instruments that were very similar to the dulcimer with a different name, but by the time it got worked around in the Appalachian Mountains and in Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina and those places, it became a dulcimer. It morphed into being a dulcimer. Now, I have read a lot of books about the history of dulcimers, and believe me, they don't all agree. So that's why I feel okay to just give you the really vague Rick Scott opinion of what happened when the dulcimer morphed out of a German instrument or something. I'm not really sure. But I do feel, well, let me just tell you, I saw a photograph once of Eleanor Roosevelt visiting a community in the Appalachian Mountains. And it's a beautiful little photograph of everyone's kind of got their Sunday best dressed, because this is the president's wife, you know, and they got dressed up in their suits and their ties, but they're tattered and they're wrinkled, but they're, you know, that sepia look that they get, the sepia tone of serious, proper. They were proper. And there's Eleanor Roosevelt standing amongst them. And they've all got their banjos and their mandolins and their guitars out. So obviously they were serenading her. But they gave her a dulcimer. They gifted her with a dulcimer. And she's holding the dulcimer kind of tentatively, like she's not really sure what this is and what it means. But she's, at the same time, you can see the woman had so much grace. And she was holding it carefully. And she was treasuring it. And it was just a lovely, lovely photograph that I remember. Now, I believe that is probably how the dulcimer first snuck out of the Appalachian Mountains into the general public, was through Eleanor Roosevelt. This is back in the 40s. And this is after the Second World War, when they were building roads now in America. America was going to be driving. They were building cars by the thousands. They were building new highways. And so, of course, pretty soon those roads got into the Appalachian Mountains, and the culture, the beautiful culture from the Appalachian Mountains started to seep out into the general public. And one of the proponents of the dulcimer, one of the, what I would say, the queen of dulcimers, was a woman named Jean Ritchie. And Jean Ritchie came from Kentucky. And her daddy built them and played them. And she learned how to play them, and she sang. Oh, her voice was beautiful. She and her husband moved to New York City at one point, I think in the early 50s. And they set up a little shop in New York City and built dulcimers. And along came a guy named Richard Farina. And Richard Farina was a writer. He was kind of the beatnik age that was going on there. I wouldn't say he was hardcore, but he was hanging out with the Ginsbergs and the Dylans and the folks like that when they were just starting that folk scene. And Richard Farina bought a dulcimer from the Ritchies. And oh my goodness, it was a beautiful thing that he did with it, because he played it the traditional way on the lap, but he started giving it that beat, you know, the one that I like so much. And with his wife, Mimi Farina, they had a little duo. They cut, I don't know, 4 or 5 albums, and they sort of brought the dulcimer out to the youth of the times. And there were certain people that started going, wow, that's a beautiful sounding instrument. I'd like to have one of those. And it was an odd bunch of people that were wondering that. For instance, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones got a dulcimer somehow. And you can hear it on some of their early tracks where he plays the dulcimer. And Joni Mitchell, she had a dulcimer. And she started playing it. And I'll tell you, that Blue album, that's some fine dulcimer playing that she's got on that one. So the dulcimer sort of came out of the mountains late in the history of the instrument itself, which I think was invented in the early 1800s. But it wasn't until the mid 1900s when it started to come to the consciousness of America. And it's an American instrument, probably one of the only instruments invented in America. And I'm ever so glad that I happened to hear a Richard Farina album and thought, wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sound. And it wasn't until about a year later that I walked into that store and saw that dulcimer with J.R. Stone at the helm. And that began my journey with J.R., the dulcimer, and all the little tunes that I could make up as much as I could. And there is one little tale that I'll tell you at the end. I won't give you all the details. But one time J.R. and I and a couple other people were hitchhiking up the Sunshine Coast, and this old beat-up Ford Pinto stopped to pick us up. We all climbed in, got in the back, and we're sitting there, and we got about 50 feet up the road before we all realized it was Joni Mitchell driving the car, and nobody could breathe suddenly, and she said, "Where are you going?" And we're all going, She was so beautiful and so cool and calm. She led us out where she was turning off the road. And as we all got out of the car, and you saw that case I had, that beat up old case, she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's a dulcimer." And I was waiting for her to say, "What's that? What's a dulcimer?" But she said, "Can I see it?" And so there on the side of the highway, I took my dulcimer out and put it on the trunk of the car, and she looked at it, she strummed it, and she goes, "Who built this?" And I said, "He did." And I pointed to J.R. And J.R., bless his heart, he was really a shy man, and he was very humble. And when she said, "You built this?" all J.R. could do was go, "Will you build one for me?" "Oh, way out. Here's my phone number." And then she sat down with J.R. for about 10 minutes and said, "Well, I want to have this, and I want to have this, and da-da-da-da-da." And she explained precisely what she wanted in a dulcimer. And J.R. Stone built Joni Mitchell a dulcimer. She's got several, but one of them is a J.R. Stone dulcimer that she ordered off the hood of her car on the highway. I saw it happen. That's the end of my story.